The howling wind carried death in its teeth, and Zachary Holloway knew that anyone caught unprepared in this blizzard would be frozen solid before dawn broke over the Oklahoma territory. He urged his mare forward through the whipping snow, squinting against the stinging ice crystals that felt like needles against his weathered face, when he spotted a dark shape huddled against an outcropping of rock just off the trail. His heart lurched as he realized it was a person, and from the looks of the tattered cloak, a woman who had maybe an hour left before the cold claimed her completely. Zachary dismounted quickly, his boots sinking into the deepening snow as he approached the trembling figure. She was curled into herself, arms wrapped tight around her body, her lips already taking on a dangerous blue tint. Her dark hair whipped around her face, and even through the storm he could see she was young, probably not more than 20 years old, and completely unprepared for the fury of an Oklahoma winter storm. "Madam," he called out, his voice nearly lost in the wind. "Madam, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, and he saw fear and exhaustion warring in their green depths. She tried to speak, but her teeth chattered so violently that no words came out. Zachary did not waste time asking questions. He shed his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed next to nothing, and he wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. "There's an old trapper's cabin about half a mile from here," he said close to her ear so she could hear him over the storm. "We'll make it. Just hold on." She managed a small nod against his chest, and he carried her back to his horse. Getting both of them mounted was a challenge in the blizzard, but Zachary had spent 26 years learning how to survive in harsh conditions. He settled her in front of him, keeping one arm locked around her waist while the other held the reins. His mare, a steady buckskin named Dolly, seemed to understand the urgency and pressed forward through the mounting drifts. The ride to the cabin felt like hours, though it could not have been more than 20 minutes. By the time the small structure came into view, barely visible through the white curtain of snow, Zachary's own body was beginning to feel the dangerous bite of cold. He had given the woman his coat, and his shirt and vest offered little protection against the wind that seemed determined to strip the warmth from his bones. The cabin door was not locked. Nobody locked doors this far from civilization, because any traveler caught in bad weather needed shelter, and denying that could mean condemning someone to death. Zachary shouldered the door open and carried the woman inside, kicking it shut behind them to keep out the howling wind. The interior was dark and cold, but at least it blocked the wind. Zachary set the woman down gently on the single cot in the corner, then immediately set about building a fire in the stone fireplace. There was a stack of seasoned wood beside it, left by whoever had last used the cabin, and he sent up a silent prayer of thanks. His fingers were stiff and clumsy as he struck his flint, but finally, a spark caught in the tinder, and he carefully nursed the flame to life. As warmth began to spread through the small space, Zachary turned his attention back to the woman. She was still shaking violently, her eyes closed, her breathing shallow. He knew the signs of severe cold exposure. They needed to get her out of her wet clothes and warmed up quickly, but he also knew he needed to be respectful about it. "Madam," he said, kneeling beside the cot, "I need to get you out of these wet things. You'll freeze if we don't. I'm going to turn around and you tell me if you need help, all right?" She opened her eyes and looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the calculation there, the weighing of options. Finally, she nodded. Her hands fumbled with the buttons of her soaked dress, but her fingers would not cooperate. After a moment, she whispered, "I cannot, too cold." Zachary took a deep breath and nodded. "All right, I'll help you, but I'm going to be a gentleman about it. You have my word." He helped her out of the sodden dress and petticoat, averting his eyes as much as possible, and wrapped her in the 2 wool blankets that were folded at the foot of the cot. Her undergarments were damp too, but he left those for her to manage when she was warmer and had more control over her movements. He hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry, then shrugged out of his own wet shirt and vest, hanging them alongside hers. The fire was blazing now, filling the cabin with welcome heat. Zachary searched the cabin's meager supplies and found a tin of coffee and an old pot. There was a pump outside for water, and he braved the storm briefly to fill it, returning quickly and setting the pot over the fire to heat. The woman watched him from the cot, the blankets pulled up to her chin. Her shaking had lessened as warmth returned to her body, and some color was coming back into her cheeks. Zachary pulled the cabin's single chair close to the fire and sat down, giving her space but staying close enough to help if needed. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice rough from the cold. "You saved my life." "Could not leave you out there to freeze," Zachary replied, watching the water begin to simmer. "I'm Zachary Holloway. Most folks call me Zach." "Fiona," she said softly. "Fiona Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, what were you doing out in that storm without proper gear?" Fiona's eyes dropped to the blankets. "Running," she said simply. Zachary did not press, though his curiosity burned. A woman alone in the Oklahoma Territory in the middle of February, running from something bad enough that she would risk a blizzard. The possibilities were not pleasant to consider. He poured the now hot water over the coffee grounds and let it steep, then brought her a cup. "Careful, it's hot," he warned as she took it in both hands. Her fingers were still pale, but they were moving better now. She sipped carefully and closed her eyes. "This is the best coffee I have ever tasted." Zachary smiled slightly. "It's terrible coffee, probably been in that tin for years. You're just happy to be warm." "That too," she admitted, and for the first time he saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. Outside, the wind continued to howl and the snow continued to fall. Zachary knew they would be stuck here for at least a day, maybe more depending on how long the storm lasted and how deep the drifts got. He settled back in his chair and sipped his own coffee, stealing glances at Fiona when he thought she was not looking. She was beautiful, even half frozen and exhausted. Her dark hair fell in waves past her shoulders, and her green eyes held depths he found himself wanting to explore. But more than her physical appearance, there was something in the set of her jaw, a strength that said she was a survivor. Whatever she was running from, she had not given up despite the odds stacked against her. "How long were you out in the cold?" he asked. "I'm not sure," Fiona replied, staring into her coffee. "Hours, I think. I left Guthrie at dawn. I thought I could make it to Oklahoma City before the storm hit, but I was wrong about how far it was." The snow started falling harder and the wind picked up, and I just kept going because I thought stopping would be worse. Then I could not feel my feet anymore, and I knew I had to find some shelter, but there was nothing but empty prairie and those rocks, so I stopped there and tried to stay warm. "Guthrie to Oklahoma City is a good 40 miles, Zachary said, frowning. "That's a long walk for anyone, especially in winter." "I did not have a choice," Fiona said quietly. Zachary wanted to ask what had driven her out into the cold, but the haunted look in her eyes stopped him. Whatever it was, she would tell him when she was ready, or she would not tell him at all. Either way, it was not his business unless she chose to make it so. "Well, you're safe now," he said instead. "Storm should blow over by tomorrow evening, I'd reckon. Then we can figure out what comes next." Fiona nodded slowly, then looked down at herself wrapped in blankets. "I have nothing," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word. "No money, no possessions, nothing but the clothes that were on my back. I cannot even pay you for saving my life or for the coffee." Zachary met her eyes steadily. "You have me," he said. "For as long as you need help, you have me. No payment necessary." Tears welled up in Fiona's eyes and spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. She set the coffee cup down carefully and pressed her hands to her face, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Zachary felt awkward, unsure if he should comfort her or give her privacy, but in the end, he stood and moved to sit on the edge of the cot, placing a careful hand on her shoulder. "It's all right," he said softly. "You're safe here." "I don't even know you," Fiona said through her tears. "Why would you help me? Why would you risk your own life for a stranger? Because it's the right thing to do," Zachary said simply. "And because I'd hope someone would do the same for my sister if she was ever in trouble." Fiona wiped at her eyes and looked at him. "You have a sister, Zachary corrected gently. "Cholera took her 3 years back, her and my parents both within a week of each other. After that, I just started drifting. Been working cattle ranches and doing odd jobs, moving from place to place, nothing keeping me tied down anywhere." "I'm sorry," Fiona said. "That must have been terrible." "It was," Zachary agreed. "But you survive, you know. You keep putting one foot in front of the other because that's what you do. Seems like maybe you know something about that." Fiona nodded slowly. "My husband died 6 months ago," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thrown from a horse, broke his neck. He was not a good man, but he was what I had. His brother inherited everything, the house, the land, all of it. He said I could stay if I became his wife instead." Zachary felt anger tighten his chest. "He couldn't just let you stay on his family." "He wanted more than that," Fiona said, and the pain in her voice made it clear what kind of more he had wanted. "I refused. He said I had until spring to change my mind or he'd throw me out with nothing. But last night he came to my room drunk and tried to force the issue. I fought him off and ran. I took what I could carry and left in the night, but then I had to leave my bag behind when I realized he was coming after me with some of his men. I hid until they passed, but by then I was already far from Guthrie with nothing but my clothes." "Did they follow you into the storm?" Zachary asked, his voice hard. "I don't know," Fiona admitted. "I don't think so. The snow was already falling when I saw them turn back, but I couldn't go back, so I just kept walking." "You were brave," Zachary said. "Foolish maybe, but brave." "I did not feel brave," Fiona said. "I felt terrified. Being brave does not mean not being scared," Zachary told her. "It means being scared and doing what needs doing anyway." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm rage outside and the fire crackle in the hearth. Eventually, Fiona's eyes began to droop, exhaustion catching up with her now that she was safe and warm. Zachary helped her lie down on the cot and pulled the blankets up around her. "Rest," he said. "I'll keep the fire going and keep watch." "You need to sleep too," Fiona protested weakly. "I will," Zachary assured her, "but you first. You need it more." Fiona did not argue further. Within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Zachary watched her for a moment, then turned back to the fire. He added more wood and settled into the chair, his mind churning with thoughts of the woman now under his protection. He had meant what he said. She had him for as long as she needed help. Zachary had been raised to believe that a man's worth was measured by how he treated those who could not help themselves, and Fiona Harper clearly needed help. But beyond the simple duty of it, he found himself drawn to her in a way he had not felt drawn to anyone since before his family died. The storm blew itself out sometime during the night. Zachary dozed in the chair, waking periodically to add wood to the fire and check on Fiona, who slept deeply and did not stir. By morning, the world outside the cabin was transformed into a landscape of white drifts and crystalline beauty. The sky, a hard, bright blue that hurt to look at. Fiona woke slowly, blinking in confusion at her surroundings before memory returned and she sat up quickly, clutching the blankets to her chest. Zachary was at the fire, cooking something in a pan that smelled surprisingly good. "Morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Found some beans and salt pork in the supplies. It's not much, but it's food." "It smells wonderful," Fiona said. She looked down at herself, still wrapped in blankets. "Are my clothes dry?" "Should be," Zachary said. He turned his back and heard her move across the cabin to where her dress and undergarments hung by the fire. There was rustling, and after a few minutes she said, "You can turn around now." Fiona stood in her brown traveling dress, now dry and only slightly worse for wear. Her hair was tangled and she had no shoes beyond the thin boots that had soaked through in the snow, but she looked stronger than she had the night before, more alive. "Better?" Zachary asked. "Much," Fiona agreed. She looked out the small window at the snow. "How are we going to get out of here?" "Carefully," Zachary said with a slight smile. "The drifts will be deep, but my horse is strong. We can ride double to Oklahoma City. It'll be slow going, but we should make it by nightfall if we leave within the hour." Fiona nodded, then looked at him seriously. "And then what?" "I told you I have nothing. No money, no family, nothing." "Then we figure it out," Zachary said. He scooped beans onto 2 tin plates and handed her one. "One problem at a time. First we eat. Then we ride. Then we get to Oklahoma City and find you somewhere safe to stay. After that we'll see." They ate in companionable silence, and Zachary found himself enjoying the quiet presence of another person. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it was like to share space with someone, to have another human being to think about beyond himself. After they finished eating and cleaned up, Zachary went outside to check on Dolly. The mare had weathered the storm well in the lean-to shelter attached to the cabin, and she nickered softly when he approached with a handful of oats from the cabin's supplies. "Good girl," he murmured, running a hand down her neck. "We've got a long ride ahead of us today. Think you can carry 2? Dolly snorted and stamped, which Zachary took as agreement. He saddled her up and led her around to the front of the cabin where Fiona waited, looking small and uncertain in the doorway. "You ever ridden a horse?" Zachary asked. "A few times," Fiona said, "but never in snow like this." "Just hold on to me and let Dolly do the work," Zachary told her. "She's sure-footed." He mounted first, then reached down to pull Fiona up behind him. She settled against his back, her arms wrapping around his waist, and Zachary tried to ignore the way his heart kicked up at the feel of her pressed against him. Now was not the time for such thoughts. He had a job to do, getting her to safety, and he needed to focus on that. The journey to Oklahoma City was slow and treacherous. The snow had drifted in places to several feet deep, and more than once Dolly had to pick her way carefully around impassable sections. But the mare was as steady as Zachary had promised, and gradually they made progress south. Fiona was quiet for most of the ride, her face pressed against his back, her arms tight around him. Zachary found himself acutely aware of every point where her body touched his, and he had to keep reminding himself that she was vulnerable and depending on him for help. Taking advantage of that would make him no better than her brother-in-law. Around midday, they stopped to rest Dolly and themselves. Zachary helped Fiona down and they stood in the snow, stamping their feet to keep the blood flowing. The sun was bright but offered little warmth, and their breath plumed in the cold air. "How much further?" Fiona asked, hugging herself against the chill. "Maybe another 4 hours," Zachary estimated. "Assuming we don't hit any more trouble." Fiona nodded, looking at the horizon. "What will I do in Oklahoma City?" she asked quietly. "I meant what I said. I have nothing. No skills that would help me find work. My husband never let me learn anything useful." "Everyone has skills," Zachary said. "Can you read and write?" Yes, Fiona said. My mother taught me before she died. That's more than a lot of folks can say, Zachary pointed out. You could work in a shop or maybe for a lawyer or someone who needs letters written. Oklahoma City has been growing fast. There's opportunity if you look for it. And in the meantime, Fiona asked, where will I sleep? What will I eat? Zachary was quiet for a moment, then said, there's a boarding house run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson. She's a good woman, known her for years. I've got a little money saved, enough to pay for a room for you for a month or so while you get on your feet. I cannot accept that, Fiona said immediately. You have already done so much. You can and you will, Zachary said firmly. Fiona, you're in a tough spot through no fault of your own. Let someone help you. There's no shame in that. Fiona's eyes filled with tears again, and she looked away. Why? She asked. Why are you being so kind to me? Zachary considered the question. He could give her the easy answer about duty and doing right, but that was not the whole truth anymore. In the day since he had found her, something had shifted inside him. Looking at Fiona, he saw not just a woman in need of help, but someone he wanted to know better, someone whose smile he wanted to earn, whose laughter he wanted to hear. Because I think you deserve kindness, he said finally. And because I want to help you. Is that enough of a reason? Fiona studied his face, and whatever she saw there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly. Yes, she said softly. That's enough. They rode on, and as the afternoon wore into evening, the scattered homesteads and buildings that marked the outskirts of Oklahoma City began to appear. The small city had grown considerably, since Oklahoma Territory had been opened to settlement 7 years prior in 1889, and now boasted several streets of shops and businesses, a church, a school, and numerous houses. Zachary guided Dolly through the snowy streets to a modest 2-story house with a sign out front that read Patterson's boarding house. He dismounted and helped Fiona down, then tied Dolly to the rail and led Fiona up the steps to the front door. Mrs. Patterson answered his knock, a sturdy woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a bun. Her face lit up when she saw Zachary. Zach Holloway, as I live and breathe, she exclaimed. I have not seen you in months. Come in out of the cold. Her eyes moved to Fiona and widened slightly. And you have brought a guest. Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Fiona Harper, Zachary said as they stepped into the warm entryway. She's had a difficult time and needs a place to stay. I was hoping you might have a room available. Mrs. Patterson's shrewd eyes took in Fiona's appearance, the borrowed coat that was too large, the worn dress, the exhaustion in her face. But there was no judgment in her expression, only compassion. I have a room, she said. Just cleaned it yesterday. Come with me, dear. Let's get you settled. Zachary paid for a month's room and board while Mrs. Patterson showed Fiona upstairs. When they returned, Fiona looked steadier, some of the fear that had haunted her eyes fading. Thank you, she said to Mrs. Patterson, for taking me in. Nonsense, Mrs. Patterson said briskly. Any friend of Zach's is welcome here. Now you look half-starved. Dinner is in an hour. You have time for a bath if you want one. I'll have my girl bring up hot water. Fiona looked like she might cry again, but she managed to keep her composure. She turned to Zachary, and for a moment they just looked at each other. I don't know how to thank you, she said. No need for thanks, Zachary replied. You just focus on getting back on your feet. I'll come by tomorrow to check on you if that's all right. I would like that, Fiona said softly. Zachary tipped his hat to both women and took his leave, leading Dolly to the livery stable a few blocks away. The stable master greeted him warmly and promised to give the mare extra oats for her hard work in the snow. Zachary then made his way to the saloon, where he had been working odd jobs before the storm hit, hoping his employer would still have work for him. The saloon owner, a gregarious man named Tom who had struck it rich in the California gold rush years earlier and invested his earnings wisely, welcomed him back with a slap on the shoulder. "Thought the storm might have got you," Tom said. "Glad to see I was wrong. You still looking for work?" "I am," Zachary confirmed. "What have you got?" "Same as before," Tom said. "Need someone to keep order, break up fights, make sure nobody cheats at cards too blatantly. Pays $1 a day plus meals. You want it?" "I do," Zachary said. It was not glamorous work, but it was steady, and right now he needed steady. He had given most of his savings to secure Fiona's room, and while he did not regret it, he needed to rebuild his funds. He started work that night, standing in the corner of the saloon's main room and watching the various card games and drinking sessions with a careful eye. It was mostly quiet, the storm having kept people indoors and sober for a day, but there was one incident where he had to escort a drunk cowboy out before he started a fight, and another where he caught a gambler with an extra ace up his sleeve. Through it all, his mind kept drifting to Fiona. Was she all right? Was the room comfortable? Had she eaten dinner? He found himself eager for morning to come so he could check on her as promised. When his shift ended near midnight, Zachary made his way to the small room he rented above the general store. It was cramped and cold, but it was his, and he had slept in worse places. He lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, thinking about green eyes and the feel of arms wrapped around his waist. He was falling for her, he realized. Falling for a woman he had known for barely more than a day. It was foolish and impractical and probably doomed to end badly, but he could not seem to stop the feelings that bloomed in his chest every time he thought of her. With a sigh, Zachary rolled over and closed his eyes, willing sleep to come. Tomorrow he would see her again, and maybe tomorrow he would figure out what to do about these unexpected feelings. Morning dawned clear and cold, and Zachary was up with the sun. He washed his face in the basin of icy water and dressed carefully in his cleanest shirt and vest, then made his way to the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson answered the door and smiled knowingly when she saw him. "She is in the dining room having breakfast," she said. "Go on in." Fiona sat at the long table with several other boarders, a plate of eggs and biscuits in front of her. She had washed her hair and it hung in damp waves down her back, and someone had lent her a clean dress in a soft blue that brought out her eyes. She looked up when Zachary entered and her face brightened in a smile that made his heart stutter. "Good morning," she said. "Mrs. Patterson said you would come." "I promised I would," Zachary replied, taking the seat across from her. "How was your first night?" "Wonderful," Fiona said. "The bed was soft and warm and I slept better than I have in months, and this breakfast is delicious. I feel almost human again." Zachary smiled at the happiness in her voice. "Good. I'm glad." They talked while Fiona finished eating about small things, inconsequential things. The weather, the town, the other boarders. But underneath the mundane conversation, there was something else, a current of awareness that flowed between them. When Fiona finished eating, Zachary asked if she would like to walk with him. The sun was shining and the streets were busy with people digging out from the storm. They walked slowly, Fiona's hand tucked into the crook of his elbow, and Zachary pointed out various shops and landmarks. "That is the general store," he said. "Owner is a man named Bill Chester. He's fair in his prices and always looking for help. Might be worth asking if he needs someone." "I will," Fiona said. "I need to find work soon. I cannot let you support me." "I don't mind," Zachary said and meant it. "But I do," Fiona replied. "You have been more than generous, but I need to stand on my own feet. I will not be dependent on anyone ever again." There was steel in her voice and Zachary respected it. "All right," he said, "but there's no rush. Take a few days to get your bearings first." They walked on, and as they turned a corner they nearly collided with three men on horseback. Fiona gasped and stumbled backward, her face going pale as milk. "Well, well," said the man on the lead horse, a heavy-set fellow with a cruel mouth. "Look what we found." "Hello, Fiona." Zachary felt Fiona's hand tighten on his arm and heard her terrified whisper, "That is him. That is my brother-in-law." Zachary stepped slightly in front of Fiona, putting himself between her and the men. "The lady does not seem happy to see you," he said calmly. "I think you best move along." The brother-in-law, whose name Zachary did not know, sneered. "This is none of your concern, stranger. Fiona is family and she is coming back home with me." "No," Fiona said, her voice shaking but determined. "I am not going anywhere with you, Vernon." Vernon's face darkened. "You have caused me a lot of trouble, girl. Running off like that, making me look like a fool. You are coming back and you are going to marry me like you should have done in the first place." "She said no," Zachary said, his voice dropping to a dangerous tone. "And I'm going to have to ask you and your friends to leave. Now." Vernon looked Zachary up and down, clearly assessing whether he was a threat. Zachary stood his ground, his hand hovering near the revolver at his hip. He was not looking for a fight, but he would not back down either. After a tense moment, Vernon spat into the snow. "This isn't over," he said to Fiona. "You belong to me. I have papers that say so." "What papers?" Zachary demanded. "My brother left debts when he died," Vernon said with an ugly smile. "Debts that Fiona as his widow inherited. I bought those debts from the creditors, which means she owes me, and I'll take payment however I see fit." Zachary felt cold rage settle in his gut. He had heard of men doing such things, using the law's bias against women to trap them, but hearing it laid out so baldly still shocked him. "How much?" he asked. "What?" Vernon looked confused. "How much does she owe you?" Zachary repeated. "Name your price, I'll pay her debts and you'll leave her alone." Vernon's eyes gleamed with greed. $500, he said. It was an outrageous sum, easily twice what any reasonable debt might be, but Zachary kept his face impassive. "Give me a week to raise the money," he said. "I'll pay you $500 and you'll give me whatever papers you have claiming Fiona owes you, and you'll sign a document saying she is free and clear of all obligations to you." "And if you do not have the money in a week?" Vernon asked. "I will," Zachary said flatly. "Do we have a deal?" Vernon considered, then nodded slowly. "1 week. Meet me at the land office with the money and we'll make it official." He looked at Fiona with something ugly in his eyes. "See you soon, dear sister." The three men rode off, and Fiona sagged against Zachary, all the strength going out of her. He caught her and held her steady. "You cannot do this," she said urgently. $500 is a fortune. Where would you even get that kind of money? "I don't know yet," Zachary admitted. "But I'll figure it out. I'm not letting him take you." "But why?" Fiona asked, pulling back to look up at him. "Why would you do this for me? You barely know me." Zachary looked into her eyes, those green depths that had haunted him since he first saw her huddled against the rocks in the storm, and he knew he could not lie to her or to himself any more. "Because I'm falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I know it's fast and probably crazy, but it's true. From the moment I found you, something just clicked into place. And I'll be damned if I let some bastard like Vernon Harper take you away when I just found you." Fiona stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. "You cannot mean that," she whispered. "I do," Zachary said. "I mean every word, and if you don't feel the same, that is all right. I'll still help you because it's the right thing to do, but I needed you to know the truth." For a long moment, Fiona just looked at him, and Zachary braced himself for rejection. But then she reached up and cupped his face with her hand, her touch gentle. "I have spent the last 12 hours trying to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude," she said softly. "But it is not. It is more than that. You saved my life, yes, but more than that, you treated me like I mattered. Like I was worth saving. No one has done that in so long. And when I woke up this morning, the first thing I thought about was seeing you again. So if you are crazy for falling so fast, then I am too. Zachary felt like he could not breathe. You mean that? I do, Fiona said, smiling through the tears that slipped down her cheeks. But that makes the money problem even worse. I cannot let you bankrupt yourself for me. Let me worry about the money, Zachary said. He bent and kissed her forehead gently, a promise of more to come. I'll figure something out. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, both of them quiet, thinking about the problem ahead of them. $500 was an enormous sum. Zachary had maybe $50 saved. Even with his salary at the saloon, he could not possibly save enough in a week. Mrs. Patterson took one look at their faces when they returned and ushered them into her private sitting room, shooing away the curious looks of the other boarders. Tell me what happened, she commanded, and they did. When they finished, Mrs. Patterson looked grim. Vernon Harper is a snake, she said bluntly. Everyone in these parts knows it. He drove his brother into debt with bad investments and then took everything when the poor man died. The fact that he is trying to trap you, Fiona, is despicable but not surprising. Do you know any way Zach could raise that kind of money? Fiona asked desperately. Mrs. Patterson was quiet for a moment, thinking. There is a poker tournament this weekend at the Grand Hotel, she said slowly. Entry fee is $50 and the winner takes the pot. Last year the prize was over $1,000, but Zach, you would be gambling everything you have. I'm a decent poker player, Zachary said. My father taught me, said a man should know when to hold and when to fold. It is a risk, Mrs. Patterson warned. Everything worth having is a risk, Zachary replied. He looked at Fiona. I'm willing to take the chance if you are. I don't want you to lose everything because of me, Fiona said, but Zachary could see the hope in her eyes. Then I won't lose, he said with more confidence than he felt. I'll win, pay off Vernon, and we'll be free of him forever. Over the next few days, Zachary prepared for the tournament. He played practice games with some of the regulars at the saloon, testing his skills and learning to read tells and bluffs. Tom, his employer, gave him advice and lent him a book on probability that Zachary studied until his eyes crossed. Fiona got a job helping at the general store, sweeping floors and organizing stock. It did not pay much, but she seemed to take pride in earning her own money, however little. Every evening, Zachary would walk her back to the boarding house and they would sit in Mrs. Patterson's parlor and talk for hours. They learned about each other in those quiet conversations. Zachary told her about growing up on a small farm in Kansas, about his sister who had loved wildflowers and his mother who had made the best apple pie in 3 counties. Fiona told him about her strict but loving mother who had died when she was 16, and about being married off at 18 to a man 20 years older who had treated her more like property than a wife. I thought marriage would give me security, she admitted one evening as they sat close together on the sofa. My father had died the year before and I had no other family. Thomas Harper seemed respectable enough, and he promised to take care of me. I did not realize until after the wedding that he just wanted a housekeeper he did not have to pay. He was a fool, Zachary said, taking her hand. Anyone who had you and did not treasure you was a fool. Fiona leaned her head on his shoulder. I'm scared, she whispered. What if you don't win? What if Vernon takes me anyway? He won't, Zachary promised. I'll figure something out even if the tournament does not work out. You are not going back to him. I swear it. The night before the tournament, Zachary lay in his narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, anxiety churning in his gut. $50 was everything he had left after paying for Fiona's room. If he lost tomorrow, he would have nothing and no way to help her. But he could not think like that. He had to believe he would win, had to hold that faith close. For Fiona. For the future, he was beginning to imagine for them together. The tournament was held in the Grand Hotel's dining room, which had been cleared of tables and set up with several poker tables. 20 men had entered, a mix of professional gamblers, wealthy ranchers, and optimistic amateurs. Zachary paid his entry fee and took his assigned seat, his heart pounding. Fiona was not allowed in the tournament room, but she waited in the hotel lobby with Mrs. Patterson, both women wearing matching expressions of anxiety. Before he went in, Zachary kissed Fiona quickly, not caring who saw. "For luck," he said, and she managed a tremulous smile. The tournament lasted for hours. Men were eliminated steadily as the antes rose and the games became more cutthroat. Zachary played carefully, folding when the odds were against him and pushing when he had strong hands. He watched the other players, noting who bluffed frequently and who only bet on sure things. By evening, only 4 players remained, and Zachary was one of them. The pot had grown to well over $900. One more elimination and they would be down to the final 2. The next hand was brutal. One of the remaining players, a gambler from back east with cold eyes, went all in on a pair of kings. Zachary had 3 of a kind and called. The other 2 players folded. When the cards were revealed, the gambler's face went white and he stood and left without a word. 3 players. 2 hours later, a cattle rancher from Texas busted out trying to fill an inside straight. 2 players. Zachary looked across the table at his final opponent, a weathered man in his 50s who had been playing with quiet competence all day. The pot now held over $1,200, more than enough to pay off Vernon and have money left over. They played for another hour, the leads shifting back and forth. Zachary's pile of chips would grow and then shrink and then grow again. His opponent was good, maybe better than him, but Zachary had one advantage. He was playing for something more important than money. Finally, the decisive hand came. Zachary was dealt a pair of aces. The flop came down with another ace and 2 low cards. He bet conservatively, not wanting to scare his opponent off. The older man called and raised. The turn brought a 4th ace. Zachary kept his face carefully neutral. 4 of a kind was nearly unbeatable, but he could not give that away. He called and let his opponent bet into him. The river was a meaningless 6. The other man went all in and Zachary called instantly. His opponent turned over a full house, kings over 6s, a strong hand, but not strong enough. Zachary laid down his 4 aces and the room erupted in cheers and groans. He had won. The tournament organizer counted out the prize money, $1,250 in cash, and handed it to Zachary with congratulations. But Zachary barely heard him. He was already moving toward the door, toward the lobby where Fiona waited. She saw him coming and stood, her hands pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide and questioning. He lifted the bag of money and her face crumpled in relief. She ran to him and he caught her, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around as she laughed and cried at the same time. "I won," he said unnecessarily. "I won, Fiona. You are free." Mrs. Patterson dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, beaming at them both. Other people in the lobby watched and smiled, caught up in the joy of the moment. That night, Zachary could not sleep. The money was hidden safely under his mattress, and in just a few days, he would meet Vernon and end this nightmare. But more than that, he kept thinking about Fiona, about the future that was suddenly possible. He loved her. It was not just infatuation or attraction, though both of those were present. He loved her strength, her determination to survive and thrive despite everything life had thrown at her. He loved her kindness and her smile and the way she listened when he talked like his words actually mattered. And she loved him too. She had said it again tonight when he walked her back to the boarding house, whispered it against his lips when he kissed her good night under the watchful but indulgent eye of Mrs. Patterson. The meeting with Vernon was set for 3 days later at the land office. Zachary arrived early with Fiona, Mrs. Patterson, and a lawyer Mrs. Patterson had insisted they hire to make sure everything was legal and binding. Vernon showed up with his 2 cronies, looking smug and confident. "You actually got the money," Vernon said, sounding surprised. "I didn't think you had it in you. Count it," Zachary said, handing over a pouch with $500 in it. "Then give me the papers and sign the release." Vernon counted the money twice, then nodded to one of his men who produced a stack of papers. The lawyer looked them over carefully, then nodded to Zachary. "These are promissory notes and debts, all legitimate," the lawyer said. "And this document states that upon payment of $500, Miss Fiona Harper née." He glanced at the papers. "Morgan is released from all financial and legal obligations to Vernon Harper. Sign here, Mr. Harper." Vernon signed, though he looked like it pained him to do so. The lawyer witnessed the signature and made copies of everything, handing one set to Zachary and keeping one for his files. "It's done," the lawyer said. "Miss Harper is free and clear." Fiona let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for days. Vernon glared at her, then at Zachary. "You think you have won something here," he said bitterly. "But she is damaged goods, a widow with nothing. She'll just be a burden to you." "Get out," Zachary said, his voice low and dangerous. "Before I forget, we are in a respectable establishment and do something we will both regret." Vernon and his men left, and Fiona sagged against Zachary in relief. "It's really over," she whispered. "I'm really free." "You are," Zachary confirmed. He looked down at her, this woman who had become the center of his world in just over a week, and made a decision. He dropped to one knee right there in the land office, in front of the lawyer and Mrs. Patterson and the clerk behind the desk. "Fiona Harper," he said, "I know this is fast. I know we have not known each other long, but I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" Fiona's eyes went wide and filled with tears. "Zach," she breathed, "are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything," he said. "Say yes." "Yes," Fiona said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes." Zachary stood and kissed her, not caring that they had an audience, and Mrs. Patterson applauded while the lawyer cleared his throat and smiled. They were married a week later in the small church in Oklahoma City. Mrs. Patterson stood up as witness for Fiona, and Tom from the saloon stood up for Zachary. Fiona wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and Zachary wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed. The ceremony was short and sweet, the words binding them together feeling both momentous and right. When the preacher told Zachary he could kiss his bride, he did so tenderly, pouring all his love and promise into that single kiss. They had a small celebration at the boarding house afterward, with cake and punch and well wishes from the other boarders and friends they had made in Oklahoma City. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Zachary and Fiona slipped away to the small house Zachary had rented at the edge of town. It was not much, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Zachary carried Fiona over the threshold and set her down gently in the middle of their new home. "Welcome home, Mrs. Holloway," he said softly. "I like the sound of that," Fiona replied, smiling up at him. "Mrs. Holloway, it feels like a new start." "It is," Zachary agreed, "for both of us." That night, they came together as husband and wife, learning each other with gentle hands and whispered words. Fiona had been hurt by her first marriage, but Zachary was patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. And when they finally joined, it was with love and trust and the promise of a future built together. In the months that followed, they built a life in Oklahoma City. Zachary continued working at the saloon while saving money to buy land. Fiona kept her job at the general store and began taking in sewing on the side, her skilled needlework becoming sought after by the town's wealthier women. They saved every penny they could, and by the time spring arrived, they had enough to purchase a small plot of land just outside town. It was not much, just 20 acres with a creek running through it, but it was theirs. They spent the summer building a house, a small cabin that grew room by room as they could afford the materials. Tom from the saloon helped, as did Mrs. Patterson's 2 grown sons who lived nearby. Other neighbors pitched in too, because that was how things worked in Oklahoma Territory. People helped each other because everyone understood that survival out here depended on community. By fall, the house was finished, with 2 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a sitting room with a stone fireplace. Fiona planted a garden and Zachary bought 3 cows and a dozen chickens. It was not a grand ranch, but it was a start. That winter, Fiona told Zachary she was pregnant. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with joy, and she held onto him and laughed too, both of them giddy with happiness and hope for the future. Their son was born in May of 1897, a healthy baby with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. They named him Samuel, after Zachary's father, and from the moment Zachary held the tiny bundle, he was lost in love all over again. Fiona proved to be a natural mother, patient and loving with Samuel even during the difficult early weeks when he cried more than he slept. Zachary helped as much as he could, walking the floor with his son in the middle of the night and changing diapers while Fiona rested. "You are a good father," Fiona told him one evening as they sat together watching Samuel sleep in his cradle. "Better than I ever dared hope for." "I had a good example," Zachary replied. "My father always said that being a parent was the most important job you would ever have. Everything else was just details." As Samuel grew, the ranch grew too. Zachary bought more land as it became available, and their herd of cattle expanded from 3 to 30 and then to over 100. It was hard work, exhausting and never-ending, but it was theirs and they were proud of what they were building. Fiona became known in Oklahoma City as the best seamstress around, and she trained 2 young women as apprentices, paying them fair wages and teaching them the trade. The money she made from her sewing business went into a separate account, her independence fund she called it, though Zachary never questioned what she spent or how she used it. 3 years after Samuel was born, Fiona gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They named them Robert and Rose, and suddenly the little house felt much smaller. But they made it work, adding on another bedroom and expanding the kitchen. Zachary hired help for the ranch, 2 young men who were good workers and respectful. The Holloway Ranch, as it had come to be known, was thriving. One evening when the twins were about 2 years old, Zachary sat on the porch of their house watching the sun set over their land. Fiona came out and settled beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "Happy?" she asked. "More than I ever thought possible," Zachary replied honestly. "Sometimes I think about that storm, about finding you half frozen against those rocks, and I can't believe how lucky I was." "I was the lucky one," Fiona said. "You saved my life." "You saved mine too," Zachary said. "I was just drifting before I met you, no purpose, no direction. You gave me something to live for." "We saved each other then," Fiona said, and kissed him softly. They sat together as darkness fell, listening to the sounds of their children playing inside under the watchful eye of one of the ranch hands' wives who helped with the children sometimes. The cattle lowed softly in the distance, and somewhere a coyote howled at the rising moon. "I love you, Zachary Holloway," Fiona said. "I will love you until the day I die and beyond." "And I love you, Fiona Holloway," Zachary replied. "You are my heart, my home, everything that matters." The years passed, bringing both joy and challenge. The ranch continued to prosper, and the Holloway name became respected throughout Oklahoma Territory, and then Oklahoma State, after statehood was achieved in 1907. Their children grew healthy and strong, Samuel becoming his father's right hand on the ranch, while Robert showed a talent for numbers and helped manage the business side of things. Rose inherited her mother's skill with a needle and opened her own dress shop in Oklahoma City when she turned 20. Zachary and Fiona grew older together, their hair going gray, their faces gaining lines earned through years of hard work and laughter. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something rich and complex and utterly essential. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a party. It seemed like everyone in Oklahoma City came, along with neighboring ranchers and friends they had made over the years. There was music and dancing and a huge cake, and speech after speech toasting the Holloways and their enduring love. When Zachary and Fiona finally had a moment alone, they slipped away to the garden behind their house, now much expanded from the small cabin they had started with. They walked hand in hand under the stars, just as they had done so many times before. 25 years, Fiona marveled. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime ago all at once. "Best 25 years of my life," Zachary said, "and I'm looking forward to 25 more." "At least," Fiona agreed, smiling up at him. "Maybe 50 more if we are stubborn enough." "With you, I think I could live forever," Zachary said and meant it. More years passed and more grandchildren arrived, 7 in total, all of them healthy and loud and endlessly entertaining. Zachary taught them to ride horses and rope cattle, while Fiona taught them to read and write and sew. The ranch continued to thrive, now run primarily by Samuel and Robert, though Zachary still spent every day working the land he loved. When Zachary turned 60, Fiona threw him a surprise party. He pretended to be shocked, though he had figured it out days earlier when he caught her and Mrs. Patterson, now in her 80s but still sharp as a tack, whispering in the kitchen. That night, surrounded by his children and grandchildren and friends, Zachary looked around and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. "Thank you," he whispered to Fiona as they danced together in the barn that had been cleared out for the occasion. "For everything. For loving me, for building this life with me, for giving me a family." "Thank you for finding me in that storm," Fiona replied. "Thank you for seeing something worth saving when I had nothing." "You were never nothing," Zachary said fiercely. "You were everything. You just didn't know it yet." "I know it now," Fiona said, and kissed him softly. They danced until late into the night, surrounded by love and music and the life they had built together from that chance meeting in a blizzard so many years ago. On a warm spring day in 1921, Zachary Holloway passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 70. He was surrounded by his family, and his last words were to Fiona, telling her he loved her and always would. Fiona held his hand as he slipped away, her heart breaking even as she was grateful for the 52 years they had been given together. Fiona lived another 5 years after Zachary died, and though her children worried she would fade away without her husband, she remained strong and vibrant. She spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories about their grandfather and about the love story that had started in a blizzard. "He was the best man I ever knew," she would tell them. "When I had nothing, he told me I had him." And he kept that promise every single day of our lives together. That is what love is, children. It is choosing each other every day in good times and bad, and never giving up on each other. When Fiona passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1926, at the age of 66, the entire town of Oklahoma City turned out for her funeral. She was buried beside Zachary on the hill overlooking their ranch, and their shared gravestone bore a simple inscription: "Together always, in this life and the next." Their children continued to run the ranch, and it remained in the Holloway family for generations. The story of Zachary and Fiona became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The tale of how their love began in a blizzard, when a cowboy found a woman with nothing and told her she had him, became a touchstone for what love should be: selfless, steadfast, and strong enough to weather any storm. The little cabin where they first lived was preserved and eventually became a historical site, a testament to the early days of Oklahoma statehood and to the enduring power of love. Visitors would walk through the rooms and imagine the young couple who had started with so little and built so much, and many left inspired by their story. Years turned into decades, and the Holloway Ranch became one of the most successful in Oklahoma. But the family never forgot their roots. Every Christmas, the Holloway descendants would gather at the original homestead and toast Zachary and Fiona, remembering the love that had started it all. And on cold winter nights when the wind howled across the Oklahoma plains, bringing snow and ice and bitter cold, the Holloways would tell their children about the blizzard of 1896, when a cowboy named Zachary found a woman named Fiona who thought she had nothing. They would tell how he sheltered her from the storm and promised her she had him, and how that promise became a love story that lasted a lifetime and echoed through the generations. It was a story of hope and second chances, of two people who found each other when they needed it most and built something beautiful together. It was a story of the Wild West, when the land was harsh and life was hard, but love could still flourish against all odds. And it was a story that never truly ended, because the love between Zachary and Fiona lived on in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, in the land they had nurtured and the home they had built, and in the hearts of everyone who heard their tale and believed, even for a moment, that true love was real and worth fighting for. The ranch itself became a symbol of what was possible with hard work, determination, and love. Visitors from all over the country would come to see the Holloway Ranch, to hear the story of its founders, and to walk the land that Zachary and Fiona had turned from empty prairie into a thriving homestead. In the main house, now much expanded from the original cabin, there was a room dedicated to Zachary and Fiona's memory. It held photographs of them at various stages of their lives, from a faded daguerreotype taken on their wedding day to pictures of them as elderly grandparents surrounded by their large family. There were artifacts too: Zachary's first lasso, Fiona's sewing kit, the blankets from the trapper's cabin that had sheltered them during the blizzard, carefully preserved despite their age. But more than the physical objects, the room held the feeling of their love, something intangible but undeniably present. People who visited often commented on it, how the room felt warm and welcoming, how it made them want to go home and hold their own loved ones closer. The Holloway family continued to embody the values that Zachary and Fiona had instilled. They were known for their fairness in business, their generosity to those in need, and their strong family bonds. When the Great Depression hit in 1929, the Holloways opened their land to families who had lost everything, letting them camp on Holloway property and work for fair wages and food. They never turned away anyone who asked for help, remembering that Fiona herself had once been a woman with nothing who needed a helping hand. During World War II, 3 of Zachary and Fiona's grandsons served with distinction, and all 3 came home safely. The family attributed this to the strength of the love that had founded their family, a love so strong it protected even across an ocean. As Oklahoma modernized and changed, the Holloway Ranch adapted but never lost sight of its roots. They embraced new farming techniques and technology, but they also maintained the traditions that Zachary and Fiona had started. Every year on the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought their ancestors together, the family would gather for a meal, and each person would share something they were grateful for, honoring the gratitude that Zachary and Fiona had felt for finding each other. The story of Zachary and Fiona was eventually written up in books about Oklahoma history, appeared in documentaries about the settling of the West, and became required reading in local schools as an example of pioneer perseverance and enduring love. Historians marveled at the detailed records Fiona had kept in her journals, which documented their entire life together with remarkable honesty and insight. Reading Fiona's words, people could feel the depth of her love for Zachary and his for her. She wrote about the little things that made their marriage strong. The way he always kissed her goodbye even if he was just going to the barn, how he never made an important decision without asking her opinion first, how he would sit with her in the evenings while she sewed and just talk about their day. She wrote about raising their children together, about the challenges they faced and overcame, about growing old together, and finding that their love only deepened with time. In one particularly moving entry from late in their lives, Fiona had written, "50 years ago, I was a woman fleeing for her life, certain that I would die alone in that blizzard. And then Zachary appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even had time to pray. He saved my life that day, but more than that, he gave me a reason to live. He showed me that I was worth loving, worth fighting for, worth cherishing. Every day since then has been a gift, and I have tried to live in a way that honors that gift. If I could go back and tell that terrified young woman huddled against those rocks that everything would turn out all right, that she would find love beyond her wildest dreams and build a life filled with joy, I wonder if she would believe me. But it's true. It's all true. And I am grateful beyond words." Zachary's own writings were less frequent but equally moving. In a letter to Samuel written shortly before Zachary's death, he had written, "Son, I've lived a good life. I've worked hard, built something lasting, and raised children I'm proud of. But none of that would mean anything without your mother. She is the foundation everything else was built on. When you find someone you love, hold on to them, fight for them, choose them every single day. That's the secret to a happy life. Everything else is just details." These writings became treasured family documents, passed down and read at weddings and anniversaries, serving as a reminder of what love should look like. As the 20th century progressed and gave way to the 21st, the Holloway Ranch continued to thrive. The family modernized operations, started a successful farm-to-table restaurant using their own beef and vegetables, and opened the historical cabin to tourists, using the proceeds to fund scholarships for young people studying agriculture or history. The scholarships were named the Zachary and Fiona Holloway Scholarships, and they helped hundreds of young people achieve their educational dreams. Many of the recipients went on to successful careers, and several returned to work at the Holloway Ranch or start their own agricultural ventures, carrying forward the spirit of hard work and determination that Zachary and Fiona had embodied. On the 100th anniversary of Zachary's death, in 2021, the Holloway family organized a huge celebration on the ranch. Descendants came from all over the country, some from overseas. There were now over 200 living descendants of Zachary and Fiona Holloway, and as many as could make it gathered to honor their ancestors. The oldest descendant present was 94-year-old Margaret Holloway Chen, Samuel's daughter, who had clear memories of both her grandparents. She spoke at the ceremony, her voice still strong despite her age. "I remember my grandmother Fiona telling me about the day my grandfather found her in the blizzard," Margaret said. "She said she had given up, had accepted that she was going to die. And then suddenly there he was, this cowboy who looked at her and saw someone worth saving. She said he wrapped his own coat around her even though it meant he would be cold, and he carried her to safety without a second thought. That was who they were. They took care of each other always, and they took care of everyone else too. This ranch, this family, everything we have, it all comes from their love and their hard work. I'm 94 years old, and I've seen a lot in my life, but I've never seen a love as true and strong as what my grandparents had. They set the bar high for all of us." After the ceremony, people walked the grounds, visiting the historical cabin, looking at the photographs and artifacts, and telling stories about Zachary and Fiona. Children ran through the fields where Zachary had once worked, and couples walked hand in hand along the creek where Fiona had loved to sit and watch the sunset. As night fell, lanterns were lit all across the property, and someone brought out a fiddle and started playing old-time music. People danced in the grass, young and old together, celebrating not just Zachary and Fiona but the legacy they had created, the family they had founded, and the love that had started it all. Standing at the edge of the gathering, watching the celebration, was a young couple, both 22 years old, who had met while researching Oklahoma pioneer history for their college thesis. They had fallen in love over dusty archives and historical documents, and the story of Zachary and Fiona Holloway had captivated them both. "You think love like that still exists?" the young woman asked, leaning against her boyfriend. "I think it does if you're willing to work for it," he replied. "That's what their story teaches us, right? Love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day. It's seeing someone at their worst and choosing to stay. It's building something together through the hard times and the good times." "I choose you," the young woman said softly. "And I choose you," her boyfriend replied and kissed her gently. They didn't know it yet, but they would get married 2 years later, and they would specifically request that part of their ceremony include the story of Zachary and Fiona, wanting to model their own marriage on that legendary love. They were far from the only couple inspired by the Holloway story. Over the years, countless people had found hope and inspiration in the tale of the cowboy and the woman with nothing who built everything together. As the celebration continued into the night, a light snow began to fall, unusual for the time of year but fitting somehow. People looked up at the sky and smiled, thinking about that long-ago blizzard that had brought two souls together and changed the course of so many lives. The Holloway Ranch still stands today, a working ranch and historical site, a testament to what two people can build when they love each other completely and refuse to give up. The story of Zachary and Fiona is still told, still inspiring, still reminding people that even in the hardest times, love can flourish, hope can survive, and two people who find each other against all odds can create something beautiful and lasting. Their love story, which began with a simple but profound promise in a blizzard over a century ago, continues to resonate, proving that true love never really ends. It lives on in the family they created, in the land they nurtured, in the values they instilled, and in the hearts of everyone who hears their story and dares to believe in the transformative power of love. And so the tale of Zachary Holloway and Fiona Harper, the cowboy and the woman who thought she had nothing, remains a beacon of hope, a reminder that sometimes the worst storms bring us exactly what we need, and that a simple act of kindness can change everything. Their story is Oklahoma's story, America's story, and ultimately, every person's story who has ever loved deeply and truly. The blizzard that threatened to end Fiona's life instead gave her a new beginning. The cowboy who could have ridden past instead chose compassion and found his soulmate. Together, they proved that love, real love, is built not in moments of passion alone but in thousands of small choices, in daily acts of kindness and sacrifice, in the commitment to stand together no matter what storms may come. Their legacy is not just a successful ranch or a large family, though both of those are impressive achievements. Their true legacy is the reminder that we all have the power to change someone's life, that kindness matters, that love is worth fighting for, and that when someone says they have nothing, sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer is yourself. Zachary and Fiona Holloway's love story, born in a blizzard in 1896 and lasting until death and beyond, stands as proof that the best stories are the true ones, that heroes don't always wear badges or carry guns. Sometimes they just carry freezing women to safety and promise to be there for as long as they're needed. And in doing so, they create something that lasts forever, a love that transcends time itself and becomes immortal in the telling and retelling, inspiring generation after generation to be brave enough to love fully, to give generously, and to believe that even in the darkest storms, hope and love can light the way home.